In the grand tapestry of magical history, few threads are as vibrant, as shadowed, or as fiercely debated as the silver and green of Slytherin House. To speak its name is to conjure images of ambition coiled like a serpent, of cunning that cuts sharper than any blade, and of a legacy so potent it has shaped the very foundations of the wizarding world. For a millennium, Slytherin has been a crucible, forging leaders and tyrants, innovators and saboteurs, from the same elemental fires of self-preservation and the relentless pursuit of greatness. Its story is not one of simple villainy, but a complex, often uncomfortable exploration of power itself, how it is sought, how it is wielded, and the profound costs it exacts from those who dare to claim it. This is a chronicle of that power, an examination of an idea that began with one man's vision of purity and evolved into a force that would define generations. It is the story of a house that produced both the most legendary reformer in magical history and its most terrifying Dark Lord. We will trace the path from a secret chamber hidden deep beneath a school to the corridors of the Ministry of Magic, from the subtle art of potion-making to the soul-shattering taboo of a Horcrux. We will dissect the minds of its most influential figures, understanding their methods, their motivations, and the ethical crossroads where they made their defining choices. To understand Slytherin is to understand that ambition is a tool, not a verdict. It is an engine that can drive progress or pave the road to ruin. The qualities that Salazar Slytherin prized, resourcefulness, leadership, determination, are value-neutral, capable of building institutions as readily as they can be used to corrupt them. This narrative delves into that duality, moving beyond caricature to uncover the intricate human and magical drama that lies at the heart of the Serpent's legacy. It is an account of how an ancient house became a modern battleground for the very soul of the magical world. Chapter 01. Foundations of a House. In the rugged highlands of 10th century Scotland, amidst the mists of a world where magic was both a raw force of nature and a whispered secret, an audacious project was conceived. 4 of the era's most powerful witches and wizards, united by a common purpose, sought to create a sanctuary for magical learning, a fortress against the growing tide of Muggle suspicion and persecution. Their names have since passed into legend: Godric Gryffindor, the brave; Rowena Ravenclaw, the wise; Helga Hufflepuff, the loyal; and Salazar Slytherin, the ambitious. Together, they founded Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, an institution built on a shared dream, yet fractured from its inception by 4 distinct and ultimately conflicting philosophies. The world they inhabited was not the structured, ministry-governed society of later centuries. It was a fragmented landscape of magical enclaves, isolated practitioners, and nascent communities, all living under the constant threat of discovery. Magic was less a codified science and more a dangerous, intuitive art. In this context, the founders' vision was revolutionary: to gather the magically gifted youth of the land and provide them with a formal, systematic education, shielding them from a world that feared what it could not understand. Each founder brought a unique perspective on what qualities were most vital to nurture in the next generation. Gryffindor valued courage and chivalry; Ravenclaw, intellect and wit; Hufflepuff, fairness and dedication. But Salazar Slytherin, a master of potions and a famously skilled Legolimens, championed a different set of virtues. Slytherin prized ambition, not as a moral failing, but as the essential engine of progress and survival. He saw resourcefulness, cunning, and a burning desire for leadership as the most practical tools for navigating a hostile world. In his view, a witch or wizard, without a strong sense of self-preservation, was a liability not only to themselves, but to the entire magical community. These were not inherently dark qualities. They were pragmatic. Cunning was the ability to see paths others missed. Resourcefulness was the capacity to turn disadvantage into opportunity. Leadership, in its purest form, was the strength to guide and protect one's own. To Slytherin, these traits were the bedrock of magical influence and the surest guarantee of enduring power. His vision was not for the timid or the content, but for those who saw the world as something to be shaped, not merely endured. The fundamental conflict, the schism that would echo through the next 1,000 years, arose from a single, critical question: who should be taught? For 3 of the founders, the answer was inclusive. Hufflepuff would teach them all, Ravenclaw the cleverest, and Gryffindor the bravest, regardless of their origins. Slytherin, however, held a far more selective and exclusionary view. He argued that magical learning should be restricted to those of pure magical ancestry. His reasoning, steeped in the anxieties of his time, was likely rooted in a deep-seated mistrust of Muggles and, by extension, those with Muggle parentage. He may have believed that Muggle-borns, or mudbloods, as the derogatory term would later become, represented a security risk, a potential bridge for persecution to cross into their carefully constructed haven. This stance was not merely a preference, it was a core tenet of his educational philosophy, a belief that magical ability was intrinsically linked to bloodline, and that diluting this heritage would lead to the eventual decline of their kind. This ideological impasse could not be resolved. The disagreement between Slytherin and the other founders, particularly his once close friend Godric Gryffindor, festered until it became an open rupture. It was a clash of worldviews: integration versus isolation, trust versus suspicion, inclusivity versus purity. The institution they had built together became a battleground for these competing ideals. Unable to persuade his colleagues, Salazar Slytherin ultimately chose to leave the school he had helped create. But he did not depart without leaving behind a final, secret legacy, a failsafe designed to one day fulfill his vision and purge the school of those he deemed unworthy. To arbitrate their differing philosophies for future generations, the founders devised an ingenious solution: the sorting hat. Enchanted with their combined intelligence and personalities, the hat was tasked with placing students into the house that best suited their nascent qualities. It was a remarkable piece of magic, a conscious artifact capable of peering into the mind of a child and discerning their deepest potential. Yet the hat's mandate was also a concession to their failure to agree. It institutionalized their differences, ensuring that the 4 distinct philosophies would persist not as a unified whole, but as separate, often rivalrous, communities within the same castle walls. While the hat was bound to the founders' intent, its interpretations were not always rigid. It could recognize nascent potential, weigh a student's choice, and perceive the complexities of a young mind in ways that a simple checklist of traits never could. It understood that a student might possess qualities of multiple houses, but it would ultimately place them where they could most thrive, or where their own choices would lead them. The values Slytherin championed therefore became the official creed of his house. The students sorted under the banner of the serpent were chosen for their ambition, their cunning, and their lineage. Over the centuries, however, this creed began to curdle. The pragmatic desire for self-preservation hardened into a doctrine of supremacy. The emphasis on pure blood heritage, once a defensive posture in a dangerous world, morphed into an aggressive and prejudiced ideology. The house, intended to be a home for the ambitious and resourceful, gained a reputation for embracing the dark arts, becoming a breeding ground for those who saw power not as a means of leadership or protection, but as an end in itself. The very traits that Slytherin identified as tools for survival became, in the hands of his less scrupulous descendants, weapons of domination. The house became a magnet for the power-hungry, and its common room, located deep in the dungeons beneath the Black Lake, fostered an atmosphere of secrecy and insularity, further separating its members from the rest of the school. The tragedy of Slytherin House is not that its core values were inherently evil, but that they were so easily corrupted. Ambition, when untethered from empathy, can become tyranny. Cunning, without a moral compass, devolves into treachery. The founder's vision, born of a genuine, if misguided, concern for the future of the wizarding world, laid the groundwork for a legacy of darkness that he could scarcely have imagined. The tools he sought to give his students were powerful, but power, as the history of his house would prove time and again, is a dangerous and seductive force. The school was built, the students were sorted, and the founder's ideals were set in stone and magic. But Salazar Slytherin's departure was not an ending. It was the beginning of a secret war, one that would be waged not on a battlefield, but in the very heart of Hogwarts itself, through a monument to his prejudice, engineered with terrifying ingenuity. Chapter 02. Salazar Slytherin, Architect of Secrecy. Salazar Slytherin's departure from Hogwarts was not a quiet retreat, but a calculated withdrawal, a strategic repositioning that left behind a hidden testament to his unyielding ideology. He was more than just a powerful wizard. He was an architect of secrets, a master of concealment, whose legacy would be measured not by what he built in the open, but by what he concealed in the shadows. To understand the man is to understand his methods, and his chosen instrument was secrecy, wielded with a level of magical sophistication that would remain unrivaled for a millennium. At the core of Slytherin's identity and power was his rare and often feared ability, Parseltongue, the language of serpents. This was not a skill that could be learned. It was an innate, hereditary trait, a marker of his bloodline. For Slytherin, Parseltongue was more than a means of communication. It was a living symbol of his heritage, a direct link to the magical potency of the serpent, an animal he chose as the emblem of his house for its associations with cunning, rebirth, and hidden knowledge. He saw this gift as irrefutable proof of the superiority of his lineage, a magical signature that could not be forged or replicated by those of lesser blood. It became the key to his most secret works, an unbreakable password passed down through his descendants, ensuring that only his true heirs could unlock the power he left behind. His masterwork was, of course, the Chamber of Secrets. This was not merely a hidden room. It was a marvel of magical engineering, a self-contained ecosystem of terror designed to lie dormant for centuries, awaiting the arrival of an heir who could reactivate its primary function. The chamber's construction speaks volumes about Slytherin's paranoia and his foresight. He built it deep beneath the castle, far from the prying eyes and diagnostic spells of his fellow founders. Its entrance was concealed within the plumbing of a girl's lavatory, a location so mundane and unlikely that it would be overlooked for generations. This choice reveals a profound understanding of human and wizarding psychology. The best place to hide something of immense importance is in plain sight, disguised as something utterly insignificant. The mechanisms of the chamber were predicated on layers of inheritance locks, all keyed to Parseltongue. The entrance itself required a spoken command in the serpent tongue to reveal itself. This was the first layer of security, a simple yet impassable barrier to anyone outside his bloodline. Deeper within, the chamber's functions, including control over its monstrous guardian, were also bound to this unique linguistic key. This was lineage-bound enchantment of the highest order. Unlike a simple password, which could be discovered or coerced, Parseltongue was an integral part of the user. This ensured that Slytherin's weapon could never be turned against his own kind, and would remain exclusively in the hands of his chosen successors. He was not just building a room, he was creating a birthright, a legacy of power that could only be claimed by those who carried his blood. The era in which Slytherin lived was one where the boundaries between different forms of magic were far more fluid than in modern times. The formal distinction between the dark arts and other, more acceptable branches of magic was not yet rigidly defined. Spells of immense destructive power, curses designed to maim or control, and enchantments that tampered with life and death were seen by some practitioners not as inherently evil, but as potent tools in a wizard's arsenal. Slytherin, a wizard of formidable power and ambition, would have undoubtedly explored these gray areas. His work on the chamber suggests a mastery of spells that went far beyond the conventional curriculum he helped establish. The creation of a lair for a basilisk, a creature bred for murder, and the enchantments required to control it and preserve it for centuries would have necessitated magic of a truly dark and dangerous nature. His actions were not just a policy disagreement with the other founders. They represented a fundamental divergence in magical ethics. Why was secrecy his chosen instrument? Because Slytherin understood that open conflict had failed. He could not persuade Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff to adopt his pure blood doctrine. A direct confrontation would have been met with their combined strength, a force that even he might not have been able to overcome. Secrecy, therefore, became his alternative to both persuasion and open war. A secret weapon, a hidden agenda, could outlive him. It could lie in wait, a patient, venomous promise, until the conditions were right for its activation. It was a strategy born of cunning and long-term ambition, the very traits he championed for his house. He was playing a game that spanned centuries, confident that his bloodline and his ideology would ultimately prevail. Tradition and lore also attribute to him exceptional skill in wandwork and the creation of magical artifacts. A wand he crafted himself, made of snakewood with a core of basilisk horn fragment, was said to be a family heirloom passed down through his descendants until it was eventually brought to America by his distant relative, Isolde Sayre. This wand, like the chamber, was keyed to its master's lineage, capable of being put to sleep or deactivated by a command in Parseltongue. This recurring theme of blood-bound magic underscores his obsession with lineage as the ultimate source and container of magical power. For Slytherin, magic was not just a skill to be learned, but an inheritance to be protected, and his greatest creations were designed to enforce that principle with lethal finality. He was not just an ideologue, he was an inventor, an architect who encoded his beliefs into the very fabric of his magical works, ensuring they would endure long after he was gone. Salazar Slytherin's true legacy, then, is not the house that bears his name, but the insidious idea that secrecy is strength and that power is a right of birth. He institutionalized paranoia within Hogwarts, creating a physical manifestation of his prejudice that would haunt the school for 1,000 years. His brilliance was undeniable, but it was a brilliance dedicated to a divisive and hateful cause. He was a visionary who saw a future he wished to create, and he possessed the skill and the patience to lay its foundations in secret, waiting for his heir to come and complete the work. He left behind a perfectly engineered weapon, a monster locked away in a hidden chamber, a testament to his belief in the supremacy of pure blood. The full horror of his creation, however, would only be understood when the chamber was finally opened, and its guardian was unleashed upon the unsuspecting students of Hogwarts. Chapter 03. The Chamber and the Basilisk. Salazar Slytherin's parting gift to Hogwarts was a masterpiece of malice, a self-perpetuating threat that embodied his darkest convictions. The Chamber of Secrets was the vessel, but its soul and its weapon was the creature he left to dwell within it, a basilisk, the king of serpents. The choice of this particular beast was deliberate and terrifyingly effective, showcasing Slytherin's deep knowledge of magical creatures and his utter ruthlessness in pursuing his goals. The basilisk was the perfect instrument for his war of attrition against Muggleborns, a predator whose very nature made it an almost undetectable and unstoppable killer. The mechanics of basilisk lore are what made it such a formidable guardian. Born from a chicken's egg hatched beneath a toad, the basilisk is a creature of immense dark magic. Its primary weapon is its gaze. Any who look directly into its large yellow eyes die instantly, This power alone makes it one of the most dangerous beasts in the magical world. However, it possesses a secondary, equally lethal quality. An indirect gaze, such as seeing its reflection, does not kill, but induces a state of profound petrification. A living death from which recovery is only possible through the restorative power of mandrake juice. This dual threat created a climate of terror and confusion. Victims were not simply disappearing. They were being discovered frozen in place, their bodies intact, but their life force seemingly extinguished. It was a form of violence that left no visible wounds, only a trail of silent, stone-like figures that served as horrifying warnings to the rest of the school. Furthermore, the basilisk is armed with venom of extraordinary potency. So deadly is this substance that it is one of the few magical materials capable of destroying a horcrux, a testament to its power to corrupt and annihilate on a fundamental level. A single drop could be fatal, and its fangs could deliver this poison with terrifying speed. Combined with its immense size and strength, the Hogwarts basilisk was a colossal serpent. Easily over 50 feet in length, it was a near-invincible killing machine. Slytherin had not chosen a mere guard dog. He had bred a living weapon of mass destruction and sealed it within the school's foundations. Control of this monster was, once again, keyed to Parseltongue. Only a speaker of the serpent tongue could command the basilisk, guiding its movements and directing its attacks. This ensured absolute loyalty to Slytherin's heir, and no one else. The creature, having been bred and raised in the chamber, likely viewed the Parselmouth as its master, responding to commands as a trained animal would, albeit one of monstrous power. This linguistic control allowed the heir to navigate the castle with the basilisk undetected. The serpent traveled through the school's extensive network of plumbing, its massive form hidden within the ancient pipes that snaked through the castle walls. Its movements were silent, its presence known only to its master, who could hear its whispered hissing in the walls, a sound that would be unintelligible and likely unheard by non-Parselmouths. The question of how such a monumental secret could be kept for so long, even from the likes of Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, and Hufflepuff, speaks to Slytherin's genius for concealment. The founders, for all their power, could not have been expected to search every pipe and crawlspace in a castle as vast and magically complex as Hogwarts. Slytherin likely constructed the chamber and its plumbing-based transit system in absolute secrecy, using enchantments to mask its presence from even the most powerful detection spells. The entrance, as mentioned, was hidden in a place of little consequence. Furthermore, without a Parselmouth to activate it, the chamber would have remained completely dormant and inert. For centuries, it was just a sealed room, its monstrous inhabitant in a deep, magically induced slumber, waiting for the command that would awaken it. Without the key, the lock was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The ethical calculus behind this creation is chilling. Slytherin's policy of purity was not merely an admissions preference. It was a genocidal imperative. He created a system designed to murder children he deemed unworthy to study magic. This was a profound betrayal of the very purpose of Hogwarts as a sanctuary. He turned the school itself into a weapon against a portion of its student body. His definition of unworthy was based entirely on bloodline, a prejudiced and unscientific metric that ignored a student's character, talent, or potential. He saw Muggleborns not as individuals, but as a contagion that needed to be eradicated for the health of the magical community. This chilling, ends justify the means logic, is a hallmark of the darkest forms of magical practice, where the humanity of the victim is erased in service of a grand ideological goal. The long-tail consequences of the chamber's existence on the school's culture were immense, even when it remained a secret. The legend of the Chamber of Secrets persisted as a bogeyman story, a cautionary tale, whispered by students for generations. This myth kept Slytherin's ideology alive, even in a dormant state. It fostered a sense of fear and mistrust around Slytherin House, solidifying its reputation for dark magic and prejudice. It created a narrative wherein Slytherin students were the heirs to a secret, violent power, a notion that some undoubtedly found alluring. When the chamber was eventually opened in the 20th century, first by Tom Riddle, and then through the influence of his diary, the legend became a terrifying reality. The attacks on Muggle-born students validated the worst fears about Slytherin House and created a schism within the school that nearly tore it apart. The Chamber of Secrets was more than just a hidden danger. It was an ideological poison injected into the heart of Hogwarts. It was a permanent monument to the idea that some students were inherently more valuable than others, that blood was more important than character, and that violence was a legitimate tool for enforcing purity. The Basilisk was the enforcer of this doctrine, a living embodiment of Slytherin's hatred. The successful defeat of the Basilisk and the destruction of the part of Tom Riddle's soul that controlled it was a victory for the inclusive values of the other three founders. But the chamber itself, and the dark legacy it represents, remains a permanent scar on the history of Hogwarts, a chilling reminder of how easily a place of learning can be twisted into a weapon of prejudice. Salazar Slytherin's actions demonstrated a capacity for long-term, strategic malice. Yet, the history of his house is not monolithic. Ironically, the very institution he founded would, in time, produce a figure whose impact on the wizarding world would be defined not by secrecy and division, but by unity and the establishment of magical law. The legendary Merlin, Chapter 04. Merlin, the Reformer. Long after Salazar Slytherin embedded his dark legacy within the walls of Hogwarts, another student was sorted into the House of the Serpent, one whose name would become synonymous with magical power of a different kind, a power used not for division, but for unification. Tradition, supported by centuries of wizarding folklore and historical texts, holds that the most famous wizard of all time, Merlin, was a Slytherin. This fact, often surprising to those who associate the house solely with dark magic, provides the most crucial counterpoint to its founder's ideology. Merlin's life and work stand as a testament to the idea that the traits of Slytherin House, ambition, cunning, and leadership, are not inherently evil, but are tools that can be wielded for the greater good. Merlin emerged from Hogwarts in the early medieval period, an era still rife with conflict between the magical and non-magical worlds. He rose to prominence as an advisor to the Muggle king, Arthur Pendragon, a position that required immense diplomatic skill and a deep understanding of both societies. This in itself was a radical departure from Salazar Slytherin's isolationist paranoia. Where Slytherin sought to build walls, Merlin sought to build bridges. He used his formidable magical abilities not to dominate Muggles, but to protect them, and to foster an era of unprecedented peace and cooperation. His ambition was not for personal power, but for a stable, just society. His cunning was deployed in the courts of kings and in the face of magical threats, always in service of a larger, more inclusive vision. His work went far beyond advising a single monarch. Merlin was a reformer, a visionary who sought to bring order and ethical structure to the chaotic magical world of his time. He is credited with being a staunch advocate for Muggle rights, actively campaigning against the anti-Muggle sentiments that were prevalent among many pure-blood wizards. He believed that the two communities could and should coexist peacefully. This philosophy was the complete antithesis of Slytherin's. It demonstrated a profound understanding that true, lasting power comes not from segregation and fear, but from integration and mutual respect. He used his Slytherin leadership qualities to rally support for his cause, persuading and outmaneuvering his political opponents within the wizarding community. One of his most enduring legacies is the institution he founded, the Order of Merlin. Originally established as an organization to champion Muggle rights and regulate the use of magic, it evolved over the centuries into the wizarding world's highest honor, an award bestowed upon witches and wizards who have performed great deeds or made significant contributions to magical society. The Order of Merlin, in its very conception, represents a codification of ethics. By creating an award system that celebrated acts of bravery, discovery, and public service, Merlin helped to define what a great witch or wizard should be. The criteria for the award, divided into first, second, and third class, emphasized contributions to the community over raw personal power. It was an institutional legacy that subtly but powerfully shaped the values of the wizarding world for generations, promoting a culture of responsibility to accompany magical ability. Historical sources also suggest that Merlin was a brilliant scholar who contributed significantly to the standardization of magic. In his time, spells were often inconsistent, wandwork was haphazard, and potion-making was a dangerously imprecise art. Merlin's work helped to lay the groundwork for a more systematic and safer practice of magic. He understood that for the wizarding community to thrive, it needed a common language of spell casting and a shared body of knowledge. This required a different kind of ambition, the ambition to create order from chaos, to build lasting educational and legal frameworks. It was the work of a statesman, not a tyrant. He applied his resourcefulness to solving systemic problems, using his influence to create a more stable and enlightened magical society. Merlin's story reframes the very definition of Slytherin greatness. He demonstrates that the house's core traits can be the engine of positive change. His ambition was channeled into public service. His cunning was used for diplomacy and political strategy. His leadership inspired a movement toward integration and ethical responsibility. He was not defined by his bloodline, but by his actions. He stands as the ultimate proof that a student's house is not their destiny. The Sorting Hat may have placed him in Slytherin for his potential, for the sharp, ambitious mind it saw within him, but it was Merlin himself who chose the path he would walk. His legacy serves as a vital counter-narrative within Slytherin House itself, an alternative model of power to the one offered by its founder and later by Lord Voldemort. While many Slytherins throughout history would choose the path of prejudice and domination, the example of Merlin was always there, a reminder that their house had also produced the wizard most celebrated for his wisdom and his commitment to justice. He proved that the serpent could be a symbol not just of cunning, but of the transformative power of a brilliant mind dedicated to the betterment of the world. His life was a quiet but powerful rebuke to Salazar Slytherin, an argument made not in secret chambers, but on the open stage of history. Merlin's influence helped to shape a more structured wizarding society, but the deep-seated prejudices championed by Salazar Slytherin did not simply disappear. They festered within certain pure-blood families, creating powerful networks of influence that would continue to shape magical policy for centuries to come. Chapter 05. Slytherin House Through the Centuries. After the age of the founders and the legendary reforms of Merlin, the story of Slytherin House becomes the story of the families who populated it. For centuries, the house served as a bastion for the wizarding world's aristocracy, a place where the children of ancient and wealthy pure-blood lines could consolidate their power and perpetuate their ideologies. The history of Slytherin is inextricably linked to the rise and fall of these influential dynasties, whose networks of patronage, strategic marriages, and political alliances shaped ministry policy and societal norms from the medieval era to the modern day. As the wizarding world evolved from a collection of disparate enclaves into a more organized society with the founding of the Ministry of Magic in the 18th century, the pure-blood ideology, championed by Salazar Slytherin, found fertile ground. What began as a defensive mistrust of Muggles hardened into a rigid social hierarchy. The concept of blood purity became a tool for maintaining power and excluding outsiders. Families that could trace their magical lineage back for generations began to see themselves as the rightful rulers of the wizarding world, and Slytherin House became their primary training ground. Admission to Slytherin was not a guarantee of a pure-blood background, but a significant majority of its students hailed from these families, reinforcing the house's reputation for elitism. Among the most prominent of these families were the Malfoys, the Blacks, and, in their later state of decline, the Gaunts. The Malfoy family, for instance, amassed considerable wealth and influence through a combination of shrewd financial dealings and a knack for aligning themselves with the powerful, whether within the ministry or, in darker times, outside of it. They were masters of plausible deniability, publicly maintaining an air of respectability while privately funding illicit activities and lobbying for policies that favored purebloods. Their patronage could make or break a career at the ministry, and their Gringotts vault was a weapon as potent as any curse. The noble and most ancient House of Black was another pillar of the pureblood elite. With a family tree stretching back to the Middle Ages, they embodied the concept of ancestral pride to a fanatical degree. Their motto, toujours pur, or always pure, was a declaration of their unwavering commitment to blood purity. They practiced disownment with brutal efficiency, blasting the names of any family members who married muggles, muggleborns, or so-called blood traitors from their family tapestry. Through carefully arranged marriages with other pure-blood families like the Malfoys, the Lestranges, and even the Weasleys in distant generations, they created a web of kinship that consolidated their influence across the wizarding community. These alliances were not about love. They were strategic mergers designed to preserve the purity of their bloodlines and concentrate magical and political power within a select circle. These family networks operated as a shadow government within the wizarding world. They controlled seats on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, ensuring the curriculum and school policies reflected their values. They held key positions within the Ministry of Magic, from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to the Wizengamot, the High Court of Wizardry. This allowed them to shape laws, obstruct progressive reforms, and protect their own interests. A well-placed donation, a timely piece of blackmail, or the calling in of an old family favor could achieve more than any spell. This was the subtle, insidious nature of Slytherin influence power, wielded not through overt acts of dark magic, but through the mundane and corruptible machinery of institutions. The waxing and waning of this pure-blood ideology can be traced through the centuries. In times of peace and prosperity, the calls for inclusivity grew louder, and the influence of the pure-blood hardliners would recede. Progressive ministers for magic would push for reforms, and the wizarding community would, for a time, become a more tolerant place. But in times of fear and instability, the old prejudices would always resurface. The pure-blood families would exploit societal anxieties, blaming muggleborns and other marginalized groups for the wizarding world's problems. They presented themselves as the guardians of magical tradition, the protectors of a heritage they claimed was under threat. The Gaunt family represents a tragic and terrifying endpoint of this ideology. As direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself, they clung to their heritage with a desperate, delusional pride. While other families like the Malfoys adapted to changing times and maintained their wealth, the Gaunts allowed their obsession with purity to lead them into squalor, instability, and violence. They married their cousins to keep their bloodline pure, a practice that resulted in severe mental and emotional instability that passed down through the generations. They were left with nothing but their ancestry and a few precious heirlooms, Slytherin's locket and a ring belonging to another famous ancestor, Cadmus Peveril. Their story is a stark illustration of how the pursuit of blood purity, taken to its logical extreme, leads not to strength, but to decay and madness. They were a living embodiment of a dying creed, a house in ruins, sustained only by the memory of a glorious past. Slytherin House, for much of its history, was the engine room of this pure-blood establishment. It was where the next generation of leaders was indoctrinated, where alliances were forged in the dormitories and common room, and where the values of supremacy and entitlement were passed down. A student's success after leaving Hogwarts often depended not just on their magical talent, but on the connections they made within the house. However, this monolithic image is not the complete picture. As Merlin proved, the house was not a monolith. There were always those who questioned the dominant ideology, those who felt alienated by the house's reputation, or those who simply focused on their own ambitions without subscribing to the politics of blood. But they were often drowned out by the louder, more powerful voices of the elite. The culture of Slytherin House, shaped by these dominant families, created an environment where ambition was often conflated with a lust for power, and resourcefulness was twisted into a justification for cruelty. This was the world that, in the early 20th century, would receive a new student, an orphan of prodigious talent, charismatic charm, and a soul already darkened by a profound emptiness. This boy, a direct descendant of the Gaunts and Salazar Slytherin himself, would rise to become the ultimate expression of the house's darkest potential. His name was Tom Riddle. Chapter 06. Tom Riddle Ascendant. In the summer of 1938, Albus Dumbledore, then Transfiguration Professor at Hogwarts, traveled to a bleak Muggle orphanage in London to deliver an acceptance letter to an 11-year-old boy named Tom Marvolo Riddle. What he found was not a frightened, bewildered child, but a preternaturally self-possessed and unnervingly powerful young wizard who had already discovered and weaponized his magical abilities, using them to dominate and terrify the other orphans. This was the world's first glimpse of the boy who would become Lord Voldemort. And from the very beginning, the seeds of his monstrous future were starkly visible. His time at Hogwarts, and specifically in Slytherin House, would not create his malevolence, but it would provide him with the tools, the knowledge, and the stage to refine it. Sorted into Slytherin almost instantly, Tom Riddle was, in many ways, the ideal student. He was exceptionally handsome, effortlessly charming, and possessed a magical aptitude that faculty members had not seen in generations. He excelled in every subject, earning top marks and collecting a trove of school prizes and awards. To the majority of the staff and his fellow students, he was a model of academic brilliance and decorum, a poor but brilliant orphan, determined to make a name for himself. He was a prefect and later head boy, positions of trust and authority that he cultivated with masterful duplicity. This carefully constructed facade of respectability was his greatest weapon, masking a predatory nature and a soul consumed by a hunger for power and a deep-seated hatred of his own mixed-blood heritage. Riddle's charisma was a tool for manipulation. He gathered around him a circle of followers, fellow Slytherins who were drawn to his power, his talk of Slytherin's heir, and his burgeoning pure-blood ideology. These were the first Death Eaters in all but name the children of the elite, like Abraxas Malfoy and the Lestrange brothers, who saw in Riddle a leader who could translate their family's latent prejudices into decisive action. He presented himself as a champion of Slytherin's cause, a crusader for the values they had been taught to revere. Yet, his obsession with his lineage was deeply ironic. Having learned of his parentage, a pure-blood mother, Merope Gaunt, who had died in childbirth, and a wealthy Muggle father, Tom Riddle Sr., who had abandoned her, he was consumed by a furious self-loathing. He despised the Muggle part of himself, the name he shared with the father who had rejected him, and the weakness he perceived in his mother for dying. This internal conflict fueled his fanaticism, driving him to become the most extreme advocate for a pure-blood world. As if by annihilating all traces of Muggle heritage in others, he could erase the stain he felt upon himself. His relationship with Hogwarts was one of profound connection and deep resentment. The castle was the first and only place he had ever considered home, a world where his exceptionalism was recognized and rewarded. He loved Hogwarts, not as a student loves their school, but as a king loves his kingdom. He felt a sense of ownership over it, a belief that it was his birthright as the heir of Slytherin. During his school years, he dedicated himself to exploring its deepest secrets, driven by a desire to uncover the legacy Salazar Slytherin had left for him. This quest led him, in his 5th year, to unlock the Chamber of Secrets, unleashing the Basilisk upon the school. He was responsible for the attacks on several students and the death of one, Myrtle Warren. When the school was threatened with closure, Riddle was forced to halt the attacks and frame another student, Rubius Hagrid, to ensure his own education could continue. This incident reveals the core of his psychology. Even at 16, he was a master of misdirection, utterly ruthless, and willing to sacrifice anyone to protect his own ambitions. He sealed away a part of his soul in a diary, preserving the memory of his 16-year-old self and the glory of opening the chamber, a safeguard to ensure his work would one day continue. The creation of his new name, Lord Voldemort, was a pivotal act of self-creation, a ritual of rebirth. It was an anagram of his full name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, a clever piece of wordplay that allowed him to symbolically kill his past. By rearranging the letters of the name he despised, he forged a new identity, one that inspired fear and commanded respect. "I am Lord Voldemort" was a declaration of his transformation from an abandoned orphan into a self-made figure of immense power. It was a rejection of his filthy Muggle father's name, a shedding of his contemptible past in favor of a future he would author himself. This act of renaming is central to understanding his character. He was not content to inherit a legacy, even Slytherins. He sought to become a legend in his own right, a figure who would transcend mortality itself. After leaving Hogwarts, Riddle worked briefly at Borgin and Burke's, a shop in Knockturn Alley specializing in dark artifacts. This seemingly humble position was a calculated strategic move. It gave him access to the wizarding world's wealthy elite and their collections of rare and powerful magical objects. It was here that he located 2 of his future Horcruxes, Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. He murdered the owner of the cup, Hepzibah Smith, and once again framed another, her house elf, Hokey, displaying his now perfected method of operating through proxies and false trails. He was a phantom, leaving behind only death and confusion, while he gathered the artifacts necessary for his ultimate ambition, the conquest of death. Tom Riddle's ascent was a chilling demonstration of Slytherin traits pushed to their most malevolent extreme. His ambition was limitless, aimed at nothing less than immortality and absolute power. His cunning was that of a predator, perfectly camouflaging his deadly intent behind a veneer of charm and brilliance. He was a product of his own damaged psyche, but Hogwarts and Slytherin House provided him with the perfect environment to hone his skills and gather his first disciples. He had learned the lessons of his founder, the power of secrecy, the utility of fear, and the potent magic of blood and lineage. But he would take Slytherin's ideology to a place of darkness and cruelty that even Salazar himself could likely never have conceived. His quest for immortality would lead him to explore the darkest, most taboo forms of magic, seeking to splinter his very soul to ensure his survival. This pursuit would define the next stage of his transformation and set the stage for a reign of terror unlike any the wizarding world had ever known. Chapter 07 Horcruxes, Soul Magic and the Limits of Taboo. At the heart of Lord Voldemort's power and his ultimate undoing lay his mastery of a branch of magic so dark, so unnatural, that it is considered the foulest of all inventions, the creation of Horcruxes. This was his chosen path to immortality, a deliberate and systematic mutilation of his own soul, undertaken with a complete disregard for the laws of nature and the very essence of what it means to be human. To create a single Horcrux is an act of supreme violation. To create multiple, as Voldemort did, was an act of unparalleled depravity, a journey into magical territory so taboo that few wizards in history had ever dared to even contemplate it. The theoretical background of Horcrux creation is shrouded in secrecy, detailed only in the most forbidden of dark texts, such as Magic Most Evil. The fundamental principle is to encase a fragment of one's soul within an external object, thereby anchoring oneself to the mortal plane. As long as the Horcrux remains intact, the creator cannot truly die even if their body is destroyed. They are left in a diminished, wraith-like state, a form of existence less than the meanest ghost, but from which they can, with assistance, eventually be restored to a physical form. The process of creating a Horcrux is as repulsive as its purpose. It requires an act of supreme evil murder. The act of killing, deliberately and without remorse, rips the soul apart. The Dark Wizard can then use a complex and horrifying spell to carve off the sundered fragment and encase it within a chosen object or, in some cases, a living being. The psychological and spiritual cost of this act is immense. The soul is meant to be whole and inviolate. To tear it is to damage oneself fundamentally, to become less human, less capable of positive emotions like love or remorse. This is why most dark wizards, even those who dared to research the process, stopped at the creation of a single Horcrux. The idea of a single anchor to life was appealing, but the prospect of further self-mutilation was a deterrent. Voldemort, however, was different. His terror of death was so absolute, his sense of self-importance so grandiose, that he saw no limit. He was not content with one failsafe. He desired a soul so fractured and distributed that his destruction would be a practical impossibility. He settled on the symbolically magical number of 7, planning to split his soul into 7 parts, 6 Horcruxes and the final piece remaining in his body, believing this would render him virtually invincible. His choice of objects for his Horcruxes reveals his obsession with legacy, power, and his own fabricated narrative. He did not choose mundane items. He selected artifacts of great historical and personal significance, objects that he felt were worthy of containing a fragment of his own perceived greatness. These included his own diary, preserving the memory of his 16-year-old self as the heir of Slytherin, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, a family heirloom that also contained the resurrection stone of the Peveril brothers, Salazar Slytherin's locket, and Helga Hufflepuff's cup, stolen symbols of Hogwarts founders, and Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, a legendary artifact said to grant wisdom. The final Horcrux he deliberately created was his snake, Nagini, a living vessel that he could keep close and control, a fitting choice for a descendant of Slytherin. Each Horcrux was protected by a sophisticated architecture of defensive magic, a showcase of Voldemort's immense talent and his paranoid, cunning mind. He did not rely on a single curse or concealment charm. He layered his defenses, creating deadly puzzles that would test the courage, intellect, and magical fortitude of anyone who dared to seek them out. The locket, for example, was hidden in a sea cave from his childhood, a place of personal significance. It was placed at the bottom of a basin filled with a potion that induced despair and horrific visions, forcing the intruder to drink it to reach the locket. The cave itself was protected by a blood toll and populated by a horde of inferi, reanimated corpses that would drag any trespasser to their death. The ring was hidden in the ruins of the Gaunt Shack, protected by a powerful curse designed to kill instantly upon contact. The diadem was concealed within the Room of Requirement at Hogwarts, a place of near-infinite hiding spots, lost amongst the clutter of centuries. These defenses were not just magical barriers. They were expressions of his cruelty, designed to inflict maximum suffering on those who would defy him. Voldemort's plan was nearly perfect, but it contained 2 fatal flaws, both born of his own arrogance. First, in his obsession with grand symbolic objects, he overlooked the power of the mundane. He believed no one could ever discover his secret let alone find all the significant artifacts he had chosen. Second, and most critically, his soul was already so unstable from the multiple acts of murder and soul-splitting that it became volatile. On the night he attacked the Potter family, the killing curse he aimed at the infant Harry Potter rebounded upon him. The curse shattered his body, and a fragment of his already mutilated soul, blasted away from the whole, latched onto the only living thing in the room, Harry himself. Thus, a seventh Horcrux was created, unintentionally. Harry Potter became the Horcrux Voldemort never meant to make, a living, breathing connection to his mortal enemy, marked by the lightning bolt scar. This unintended split was a consequence of pushing magic to its absolute limits, a testament to the fact that even a wizard as powerful as Voldemort could not fully control the primordial forces he had unleashed. The existence of the Horcruxes explains Voldemort's resilience and his ability to return to power after his first defeat. His soul was anchored to the world, allowing him to endure for over a decade as a spectral parasite, awaiting the chance to regain a body. It was his greatest secret and his ultimate vulnerability. As long as even one Horcrux remained, he could not be killed. The war against him was, therefore, not a conventional battle, but a desperate hunt, a race to find and destroy these hidden pieces of his soul before he could achieve his final victory. This quest required not just power, but a deep understanding of his history, his psychology, and the dark magic he commanded. Voldemort's use of Horcruxes was the ultimate expression of Slytherin self-preservation, twisted into a monstrous obsession. He sought to secure his own existence at the cost of his own humanity and the lives of countless others. It was a strategy of pure, selfish survival, devoid of any other purpose. His soul, once whole, was now a shattered ruin, scattered across the magical world in pieces. This act of profound self-destruction, undertaken in the name of self-preservation, would ironically be the very thing that made his final defeat possible. With his soul anchored and his body restored, Voldemort was ready to resume his conquest. The wizarding world would now face him in open conflict, a confrontation that would reveal the full extent of his tactical genius and the terrifying power he now commanded. Chapter 08: Voldemort in Open Conflict. With his return to a physical body, Lord Voldemort initiated the Second Wizarding War, moving from the shadows of conspiracy into the light of open conflict. This new phase of his campaign revealed him not merely as a powerful dark wizard, but as a brilliant and ruthless military commander. His dueling style, his strategic use of advanced magic, and the organizational logic of his Death Eaters demonstrated a terrifying mastery of warfare. The Ministry of Magic, crippled by denial and incompetence, was utterly unprepared for the onslaught. Voldemort's strategy was not just to win battles, but to shatter the morale of the wizarding world, using fear as his most potent magical multiplier. The duel between Voldemort and Albus Dumbledore in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic stands as a masterclass in high-level magical combat, a tactics lab showcasing two of the most powerful wizards in history. Voldemort's performance in this confrontation was a terrifying display of raw power, creativity, and control. He fought with a fluid, predatory grace, utilizing the full range of his magical arsenal. He demonstrated complete mastery of non-verbal spellcasting, allowing him to attack with silent, unpredictable speed. His duel with Dumbledore involved not just a rapid exchange of curses, but a dynamic manipulation of the environment itself. He animated the statues of the Fountain of Magical Brethren, turning them into colossal weapons. He conjured a shield of molten silver to block Dumbledore's spells, and a great fiery serpent to attack him. This was not the rigid, formulaic spellwork of a lesser wizard. This was a symphony of destruction, conducted with supreme confidence and artistic flair. One of his most intimidating abilities, perfected after his resurrection, was unsupported flight. The ability to fly without a broomstick or any other magical aid was a feat previously thought impossible. It granted him unparalleled mobility on the battlefield, allowing him to strike from any angle and move with a speed that was almost impossible to track. This skill was a profound statement of his power, a visible sign that he had transcended the known limits of magic. It was a psychological weapon as much as a tactical one, presenting him as a godlike figure, untethered by the normal constraints of the magical world. Central to his command and control strategy was his unparalleled mastery of the mind arts, legilimency and occlumency. Legilimency, the ability to penetrate another's mind and interpret their thoughts and emotions, was his primary tool for interrogation, intimidation, and ensuring loyalty. He could sift through a person's memories with ease, extracting information and detecting deceit. Few could stand against his mental assault. Conversely, his own mind was an impregnable fortress. As a master occlumens, he could shield his thoughts and plans from even the most skilled legilimens, like Dumbledore or Snape. This mental discipline was crucial for his role as a commander, allowing him to maintain absolute secrecy and project an aura of inscrutable power. He used this connection to his followers, and fatefully to Harry Potter, as a network, a way to project his will and his rage across great distances. The Death Eaters, his army of followers, were organized not like a conventional military, but as a terrorist organization built around a cult of personality. Their command structure was simple and absolute. Voldemort was the supreme leader, and his will was law. His inner circle consisted of his most loyal and powerful lieutenants, such as Bellatrix, Lestrange, and Lucius Malfoy, who were rewarded for their service, but lived in constant fear of his displeasure. The Dark Mark was their symbol, a terrifying brand burned into the flesh of every follower. It served as both a badge of honor and a magical communication device. By touching his own mark, Voldemort could summon his Death Eaters to his side instantly, no matter where they were. The mark also burned whenever he was active, a constant, physical reminder of their allegiance and his presence. Fear was the cornerstone of his entire strategy. He understood that terror could break a society more effectively than any curse. The random, brutal attacks on Muggles and magical families, the public assassinations of ministry officials, and the infiltration of key institutions were all designed to create an atmosphere of paranoia and helplessness. The use of unforgivable curses, particularly the Cruciatus curse for torture and the Killing curse for swift, merciless execution, became commonplace. He and his followers wielded these spells with casual cruelty, demonstrating their complete rejection of societal norms and magical law. This campaign of fear was a magical multiplier. It sowed discord, turned neighbors against each other, and made people desperate for any semblance of order, even the brutal order that Voldemort promised to impose. Voldemort's strategic genius lay in his ability to combine overwhelming magical force with sophisticated political maneuvering. While his Death Eaters waged a campaign of terror, he orchestrated a silent coup within the Ministry of Magic. Through a combination of blackmail, imperious curses, and the exploitation of ambitious and corrupt officials like Dolores Umbridge, he dismantled the ministry from the inside. By the time he officially took control, the institution was already a hollow shell, its authority eroded, and its leadership compromised. He did not need to lay siege to the ministry. He simply walked in and took it. His reign was one of systematic oppression. He established a pure blood regime, creating the Muggle-born Registration Commission to round up and persecute those with Muggle heritage, falsely accusing them of stealing magic. Hogwarts, under the control of his loyalists, was transformed from a school of learning into a center for indoctrination and terror. He had, at last, achieved Salazar Slytherin's dream, but on a scale his ancestor could never have imagined. He was not just purging a school. He was reshaping an entire society in his own image. In open conflict, Voldemort was a force of nature, a whirlwind of dark magic and strategic brilliance. His power seemed absolute, his victory inevitable. But even at the height of his power, he was opposed by forces he could not understand. Within his own ranks, a quiet, resentful figure was playing a long and dangerous game of deception, a master of secrets whose loyalty was not to the Dark Lord, but to a memory. This man, Severus Snape, would prove that the greatest power is not always the one that is most loudly displayed. Chapter 09. Severus Snape. Innovation and Restraint. In the shadow of Lord Voldemort's spectacular and destructive power stood one of his most trusted lieutenants, a man whose true allegiance remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Second Wizarding War. Severus Snape, potions master and later headmaster of Hogwarts, was the ultimate Slytherin enigma. He embodied the house's traits of cunning, ambition, and resourcefulness, but he channeled them into a path of breathtaking risk and profound personal sacrifice. His power was not defined by explosive force or overt domination, but by innovation, discipline, and, most importantly, restraint. He was a warrior who fought his most critical battles in the silence of his own mind and the solitude of his potions lab. Snape's genius was evident from a young age. During his time as a student at Hogwarts, he was not content to merely follow the curriculum. He was an innovator, a brilliant magical mind, who saw the standard textbooks as a starting point, not a final word. His copy of Advanced Potion Making was a testament to his talent, filled with his own handwritten annotations, corrections, and improvements to established formulas. He refined brewing instructions and streamlined processes, demonstrating a deeper, more intuitive understanding of potion theory than the textbook's author. This was not just academic tinkering. It was a sign of a mind that constantly sought to deconstruct, understand, and improve upon the magic it encountered. This innovative spirit extended to spell creation, a rare and difficult branch of magic. During his school years, he invented a number of spells, scribbling them in the margins of his textbook under the self-styled moniker of the Half-Blood Prince. These creations ranged from the mischievous, like the Jinx Levicorpus, which hoisted a person into the air by their ankle, to the devastatingly lethal. His most infamous invention was Sectum Sempra, a curse that slashed at its victim as if with an invisible sword, causing deep, bleeding wounds that were incredibly difficult to heal. The existence of such a curse reveals the darkness that resided within the young Snape, a capacity for cruelty born of his own pain and resentment. Yet, he also developed the counter-curse, demonstrating a complete and responsible understanding of his own creations. This duality, the capacity for both immense harm and precise remedy, would define his entire life. Snape's primary weapon, however, was his mind. He was a dual master of occlumency and legilimency, a skill set that made him the perfect double agent. In the presence of Lord Voldemort, one of the most accomplished legilimens of all time, Snape was able to maintain a flawless shield around his true thoughts and intentions. This required a level of mental discipline and control that is almost unimaginable. He had to compartmentalize his mind, presenting Voldemort with a carefully curated version of reality, that of a loyal, if somewhat resentful, Death Eater, while keeping his true purpose hidden in the deepest, most protected recesses of his consciousness. It was a constant, high-stakes performance, where a single slip, a single flicker of emotion, would have meant immediate and agonizing death. His occlumency was not just a defense, it was his life's work, a mental fortress he maintained for years on end. His dueling style reflected his personality, precise, efficient, and surgically effective. He was not prone to the theatrical, destructive displays favored by Voldemort or Bellatrix Lestrange. He preferred tactical retreats and surgical strikes, using his deep knowledge of offensive and defensive magic to neutralize threats with the minimum necessary force. He understood that survival, especially for a spy, depended on not revealing the full extent of one's abilities. His power was in what he held back, the spells he chose not to cast. This restraint was a form of strength, a disciplined control that his more impulsive adversaries lacked. He was a master of the counter-curse, the block, and the disarming charm, a duelist who fought to incapacitate, not necessarily to kill, unless absolutely necessary. The moral calculus of his life was agonizingly complex. To maintain his cover as a loyal Death Eater, he was forced to participate in, or at least witness, acts of horrific cruelty. He had to stand by while his colleagues were tortured and killed, and he had to perform the ultimate act of betrayal, killing Albus Dumbledore. This act, undertaken at Dumbledore's own request, was the linchpin of their long-planned strategy to defeat Voldemort. It cemented Snape's position at the Dark Lord's side, granting him unparalleled access and influence. But it also damned him in the eyes of the wizarding world. He accepted the role of the villain to achieve a greater good, a sacrifice that required him to endure the hatred of those he was secretly fighting to protect. The enduring symbol of his true allegiance, the secret he protected above all others, was his Patronus. A Patronus charm is a manifestation of positive energy, a projection of hope and happiness that takes the form of an animal. Snape's Patronus was a doe the same form as Lily Potter's. It was a constant, immutable symbol of his lifelong, unrequited love for Harry Potter's mother, the driving force behind his decision to defect from Voldemort and dedicate his life to protecting her son. This Patronus was his emotional constant, the core of light in a life filled with darkness and deception. It was the one piece of his soul that Voldemort could never touch, the source of the courage that allowed him to walk his lonely and treacherous path. His power, in the end, was defined not by his ambition for greatness, but by his capacity for enduring love and his commitment to a promise made long ago. Severus Snape represents the Slytherin archetype, at its most complex and morally ambiguous. He was a man who used the traditional tools of his house, cunning, secrecy, and a deep understanding of dark magic, not for personal gain, but in the service of a cause he believed in. His life was a testament to the fact that power is not just about force, but about control, and that the greatest acts of bravery are often the ones that are never seen. While Snape wielded his influence from the shadows, another Slytherin head of house operated in the open, demonstrating a completely different, yet equally potent, form of power, the power of networks. Chapter 10. Horace Slughorn, the Power of Networks. While Severus Snape embodied the Slytherin art of secrecy and espionage, his predecessor and successor as Potions Master Horace Slughorn represented a different, more convivial face of Slytherin ambition. Slughorn was a wizard who understood that true influence is not always wielded at the end of a wand. His power was not in curses or conspiracies, but in connections. He was a master of soft power, a social architect who built an empire of influence not through intimidation, but through the careful cultivation of talent. His life's work was the Slug Club, an exclusive group of students he identified as having the potential for greatness, a network he used to his own advantage for decades. Slughorn's defining skill was his eye for talent. He could spot a future minister for magic, a Quidditch star, or a best-selling author from across a classroom. He was drawn to students who were ambitious, well-connected, or exceptionally gifted. He would invite these chosen few to lavish dinner parties in his office, where he would ply them with crystallized pineapple and ply them for information, subtly building relationships that would last a lifetime. The Slug Club was, in essence, a talent brokerage. Slughorn acted as the central hub, connecting his promising students with his already successful former students. A recommendation from him could open doors at the ministry, secure a tryout for a professional Quidditch team, or land an apprenticeship with a master potioneer. In return, he received the perks of his network: free tickets to matches, a steady supply of his favorite sweets, and most importantly, the ability to say he knew everyone who mattered. His own magical prowess was considerable, particularly in his chosen field of potion making. He was an apex potioneer, a brewer of immense skill whose knowledge of the art was second to none. He was an expert in some of the most complex and powerful potions known to wizard kind. He could brew Felix Felicis, or liquid luck, a potion so difficult to make and so potentially dangerous in its effects that it was highly regulated. Felix Felicis was a tool for manipulating fate, for creating opportunities where none existed, a perfect metaphor for Slughorn's own philosophy of life. He also mastered Amortentia, the most powerful love potion in the world, a concoction that did not create true love, but an intense, unhealthy obsession, a powerful tool for influencing emotion. His casual familiarity with Polyjuice Potion, which allowed a drinker to assume the physical form of another person, demonstrated his mastery over the magic of identity itself. For Slughorn, potions were not just chemical concoctions. They were tools for altering luck, emotion, and identity, the fundamental forces that shape a person's life. Yet, for all his talent and influence, Slughorn was a man defined by a deep-seated desire for comfort and a profound aversion to risk. This cautious nature led to the greatest mistake of his life. As a young professor, he had taken a particular interest in a brilliant student named Tom Riddle. Flattered by the boy's attention and impressed by his talent, Slughorn had, in a moment of weakness, told Riddle about the dark magic of Horcruxes. It was a purely academic discussion, he told himself, but he had given the most dangerous student Hogwarts had ever known the key to immortality. The shame and terror of this realization haunted him for the rest of his life. He became a master of memory magic, not as a weapon against others, but against himself. He tampered with his own memory of the conversation, excising the incriminating parts, leaving a distorted, foggy version of the event. It was an act of magical self-deception, an attempt to bury a truth he could not bear to face. This act of modifying his own memory was a perversion of occlumency. Instead of shielding his mind, he deliberately corrupted it to protect his own peace of mind. His desire to avoid confrontation and danger led him to go on the run when Albus Dumbledore sought to bring him back to Hogwarts to teach during the Second Wizarding War. He used his considerable skills to evade detection, moving from house to house, living a life of borrowed luxury. He was a man caught between his conscience and his comfort. He knew he held the key to defeating Voldemort, the true, untampered memory of their conversation, but he was terrified of the consequences of revealing it. It took the combination of Dumbledore's persuasion and Harry Potter's appeal, aided by a dose of Felix Felicis, to finally convince him to do the right thing. Giving up the memory was an act of immense courage for a man who had spent his life avoiding such moments. It was a turning point, a decision to finally accept responsibility for his past actions. Slughorn's moral pivot culminated in the Battle of Hogwarts. When the castle came under attack, his first instinct was, characteristically, one of self-preservation. He led the Slytherin students to the dungeons, ostensibly to be evacuated, but in the end, his better nature, his loyalty to the school, and his fundamental decency won out. He returned to the battle, not alone, but at the head of reinforcements from Hogsmeade. In a moment that would have stunned anyone who saw him only as a social climber, he stood alongside Minerva McGonagall and Kingsley Shacklebolt, dueling Lord Voldemort himself in the Great Hall. It was the ultimate act of standing up when it counted, a demonstration that beneath his bon vivant exterior and his calculated ambition, there was a core of genuine bravery. Horace Slughorn represents a more common, and perhaps more relatable, form of Slytherin ambition. His goal was not domination, but comfort, influence, and a place at the table of the powerful. He was a collector of people, a man who saw relationships as the ultimate currency. His story is a powerful reminder that Slytherin traits are not a monolith. Ambition can be social as well as political. Cunning can be used to secure a good seat at a Quidditch match, as well as to plot a coup. And, most importantly, a lifetime of calculated self-interest can, in the final analysis, give way to a moment of pure, selfless heroism. He was not a warrior or a spy, but in his own way, his contribution to Voldemort's defeat was just as critical. But not all of Voldemort's followers were as complex or conflicted as Slughorn or Snape. Some were driven by something far simpler and more terrifying: pure, unadulterated fanaticism. And none embodied this more completely than his most devoted servant, Bellatrix Lestrange. Chapter 11. Bellatrix Lestrange. Fanaticism as force. If Severus Snape represented the calculated, restrained power of a Slytherin strategist, Bellatrix Lestrange was its opposite, a maelstrom of chaotic, fanatical devotion. As Lord Voldemort's most loyal and sadistic lieutenant, she wielded her considerable magical power, not with precision, but with wild, gleeful abandon. Her strength came from a place of pure, unhinged fanaticism, a worshipful adoration of the Dark Lord that transcended mere allegiance and became the sole organizing principle of her existence. In Bellatrix, the Slytherin trait of ambition was twisted into a desperate, pathological need for her master's approval, making her one of the most dangerous and unpredictable forces in the Second Wizarding War. Bellatrix, born into the noble and most ancient House of Black, was a product of the most extreme pureblood ideology. From a young age, she was immersed in the doctrine of magical supremacy, a belief system she embraced with fervent, unquestioning zeal. Her marriage to Rodolphus Lestrange, a fellow pureblood from an equally ancient family, was a union of ideological equals. When Lord Voldemort first rose to power, she and her husband were among his earliest and most ardent followers. They were not reluctant recruits or political opportunists. They were true believers who saw in Voldemort the leader who would finally realize their dream of a world purged of muggles and mudbloods. Her defining magical skill was her mastery of the Cruciatus Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses. To successfully cast this curse, a wizard must not only say the incantation, they must genuinely desire to inflict immense pain on their victim. For Bellatrix, this was not a challenge. She reveled in cruelty, finding a deep, ecstatic pleasure in the suffering of others. Her use of the Cruciatus Curse on Frank and Alice Longbottom, Neville's parents, was an act of infamous brutality. After Voldemort's first fall, she, along with her husband, brother-in-law, and Barty Crouch Jr., tortured the 2 Aurors into insanity, seeking information about their master's whereabouts. This act, for which she was sentenced to a life term in Azkaban, cemented her reputation as a sadist of the highest order. For her, pain was not just a tool of interrogation. It was an expression of her devotion, a sacrament in the dark church of Lord Voldemort. Her long years in Azkaban, a place that drove most prisoners to despair and madness, did not break her. They tempered her fanaticism into something even more potent. The constant presence of the Dementors, which feed on happiness, had little effect on her, for her soul was already consumed by an obsession so total that it left little room for any other emotion. When Voldemort engineered a mass breakout from the prison, she emerged not as a broken shell, but as a warrior reborn, her loyalty undiminished, and her thirst for violence greater than ever. Her post-Azkaban resilience made her even more valuable to Voldemort. She was a follower whose loyalty had been tested by the ultimate hardship and found to be absolute. In a duel, Bellatrix was a terrifying opponent. Her fighting style was a reflection of her personality, wild, theatrical, and explosively powerful. She moved with a manic energy, laughing and taunting her opponents as she unleashed a torrent of dark curses. She was a practitioner of psychological warfare, using fear and mockery to unnerve her enemies before striking them down. She killed her own cousin, Sirius Black, with a curse that sent him falling through the ancient veiled archway in the Department of Mysteries, her triumphant taunts echoing in the chamber after him. Her ferocity made her one of Voldemort's most effective field commanders, a blunt instrument of terror to be unleashed on his enemies. However, her fanaticism, which was the source of her strength, was also the cause of her greatest strategic weakness: overconfidence. Her absolute belief in her own superiority and the invincibility of her master often led to carelessness. She was arrogant, underestimating her opponents and reveling in her cruelty to the point of distraction. She allowed Harry Potter and his friends to escape from Malfoy Manor because she was more focused on the possibility that they had stolen the Sword of Gryffindor from her Gringotts vault, a vault that also contained one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Hufflepuff's cup. Her panic at the thought of her master discovering her failure temporarily overrode her tactical judgment. This hubris ultimately led to her downfall. During the final moments of the Battle of Hogwarts, after striking down Nymphadora Tonks, she engaged in a duel with Molly Weasley. Enraged by Bellatrix's attempt to kill her daughter, Ginny, Molly Weasley, a witch Bellatrix would have dismissed as a mere housewife, unleashed a level of protective fury that Bellatrix could not comprehend. She toyed with Molly, mocking her for the death of her son, Fred. But her arrogance made her sloppy. In a stunning display of maternal power, Molly Weasley struck her down with a curse that killed her instantly. It was a deeply ironic end for a witch who prided herself on her pure blood and dark power to be defeated by the very force she could never understand: a mother's love. Bellatrix Lestrange represents fanaticism as a magical force. Her loyalty was so absolute that it became a source of immense power, but it was a brittle, one-dimensional strength. She was incapable of subtlety, of strategy, of anything beyond a full frontal assault fueled by hatred and devotion. She was a true believer in the purest sense, a witch who had given her entire soul over to her master's cause. Her story is a chilling example of how the Slytherin drive for belonging and purpose can, in a warped mind, become a vehicle for the most extreme and destructive forms of devotion. While Bellatrix demonstrated the destructive power of unwavering loyalty, another member of her own family, her young cousin Regulus Black, would prove that the most profound act of rebellion can come from a place of quiet, dawning horror. Chapter 12. Regulus Black, the Quiet Saboteur. In the dark history of the House of Black, a family that produced fanatics like Bellatrix, Lestrange, and dutiful purebloods who filled the ranks of the Death Eaters, the story of Regulus Arcturus Black is one of quiet, astonishing rebellion. For most of his short life, Regulus was the model pureblood son. He was a Slytherin, a seeker on the house Quidditch team, and, by the age of 16, a loyal Death Eater, eager to serve the Dark Lord his family so admired. Yet, beneath the surface of this conventional path lay a conscience and a courage that would lead him to commit the ultimate act of betrayal against Voldemort, an act of sabotage so secret that its full significance would not be understood for nearly 2 decades. Regulus grew up in the shadow of his older brother Sirius, who had defied their family's pure-blood traditions by being sorted into Gryffindor and openly rejecting their values. Regulus, in contrast, embraced them. He was the dutiful son, the heir who upheld the family motto of toujours pour. He joined the Death Eaters, believing in their cause, seeing Voldemort as a leader who would restore the wizarding world to its proper order, with pure bloods at the helm. He was young, idealistic in a dark and twisted way, and eager to prove his worth to the master his parents revered. The turning point for Regulus came not through a dramatic confrontation, but through a quiet act of cruelty he was asked to facilitate. Lord Voldemort, in his quest to protect his Horcruxes, required the assistance of a house elf to test the defenses he had placed on Salazar Slytherin's locket. He chose Creature, the Black family's devoted and long-serving house elf. Regulus, proud to be of service, volunteered Creature for the task. Voldemort took the elf to the sea cave, forced him to drink the potion of despair from the basin, placed the locket inside, and left him to be dragged to his death by the Inferi. But Voldemort, in his arrogance, underestimated the unique magic of House Elves. Creature, through his own powerful brand of apparition, was able to escape the cave and return to his master, Regulus, as he had been commanded. The sight of the traumatized, near-dead creature and the story he told of Voldemort's casual, sadistic cruelty shattered Regulus's illusions. He had signed up to fight a war for an ideological cause, but this act revealed the true nature of the master he served. Voldemort was not a noble leader. He was a monster who used and discarded his followers without a second thought, whose disregard for life extended even to the most loyal and helpless of creatures. For Regulus, this was a profound moral awakening. He began to read Voldemort's pattern, to understand the limitless nature of his ambition and his quest for immortality. He realized that Voldemort was not just trying to win a war. He was trying to conquer death itself. It is likely from this realization, and perhaps further secret inquiries, that he deduced the true nature of the locket. It was a horcrux, a fragment of Voldemort's soul. In that moment, Regulus Black made a decision that would cost him his life, but would ultimately strike a critical blow against the Dark Lord. He chose to act. He was not a powerful enough wizard to challenge Voldemort openly, nor was he in a position to defect to the Order of the Phoenix. His rebellion had to be as secret as the crime he sought to undo. This was an act of pure Slytherin cunning, using the enemy's own methods of secrecy against him. He devised a plan, a high-stakes mission to retrieve and destroy the Horcrux. The logistics of his mission were meticulously planned. He had a duplicate locket created, an identical copy of the one he now knew was hidden in the cave. Inside this fake locket, he placed a note, a final testament to his change of heart. Then, he commanded Creature to take him to the sea cave. He knew he would not be able to escape the cave's defenses as Creature had. His plan was a suicide mission. Upon reaching the basin, he ordered Creature to take the real locket and replace it with the fake one once the basin was empty. Then, Regulus himself drank the potion of despair, sacrificing himself to the Inferi, so that Creature could escape with the Horcrux. His final command to the house elf was to take the locket and destroy it. The note he left inside the fake locket was a powerful moral indictment of Voldemort, a message from beyond the grave. It read, "To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B." This note was an act of profound defiance. It was Regulus reclaiming his identity, not as a follower, but as the man who had outsmarted the Dark Lord. The use of his initials, R.A.B., was a final personal signature on his life's work. Regulus's single act of sabotage realigned the endgame of the entire war. Though Creature was unable to destroy the locket, his preservation of it, and the story of Regulus's sacrifice, provided Harry Potter with the crucial knowledge and means to eventually find and destroy one of Voldemort's soul fragments. Regulus Black, the quiet, dutiful Slytherin, became a quiet saboteur. He used his inside knowledge, his cunning, and his command over his family's house elf to strike a blow that was more significant than many of the open battles fought by the Order of the Phoenix. His story is a powerful testament to the idea that true courage is not always loud. It can be a quiet decision, a secret plan, a final, selfless act in a dark, forgotten place. He was a Slytherin who died fighting for the very values his house so often scorned: loyalty, love for his house elf, and a fundamental sense of right and wrong. Not all evil, however, announces itself with dark marks and unforgivable curses. Sometimes, The most insidious form of cruelty is the one that operates within the rules, cloaked in the legitimacy of institutions. Such was the case with a Ministry of Magic official whose ambition and prejudice found their ultimate expression not in dark magic, but in the sterile violence of bureaucracy. Dolores Umbridge. Chapter 13. Dolores Umbridge. Institutionalized cruelty. While Lord Voldemort represents the terror of magical anarchy, Dolores Jane Umbridge embodies a different, and in some ways more chilling form of evil, the tyranny of institutionalized cruelty. A career bureaucrat at the Ministry of Magic, Umbridge demonstrated how the traits of ambition and cunning, when divorced from empathy and coupled with a thirst for control, could be weaponized within the structures of government. She was a Slytherin in all but name, her entire career a testament to the house's less admirable qualities. Her brand of evil was not found in forbidden curses, but in the meticulous application of rules, the sterile language of decrees, and the quiet, soul-crushing violence of a perfectly ordered system. Umbridge's ascent through the ministry was a masterclass in political maneuvering. She attached herself to powerful figures, echoing their prejudices and making herself indispensable to their agendas. She rose to the position of senior undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, by playing on his fears and his desire for control. During a time when the ministry was desperate to deny Voldemort's return, Umbridge became the perfect instrument of its policy of denial. She championed the idea that Albus Dumbledore was a threat, a rival seeking to usurp the minister's power, and that Harry Potter was an unstable attention seeker. Her ambition was not for the grand, philosophical goals of Voldemort, but for personal power and the authority to impose her rigid, prejudiced worldview on others. Her tenure as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, a position secured through ministry decree, was a strategic move to infiltrate and control the school from within. Her teaching philosophy was a sham. She refused to teach any practical defensive magic, insisting on a purely theoretical, ministry-approved curriculum. This was a deliberate act of sabotage, designed to leave the students defenseless and to prevent Dumbledore from training what the ministry feared was his own personal army. Her power was decree-driven. As the first and only Hogwarts High Inquisitor, she systematically dismantled the school's traditions and freedoms, issuing a constant stream of educational decrees that regulated every aspect of student life, from the prohibition of student organizations to the authorization of corporal punishment. Her signature weapon was the Black Quill. This was not a tool of education, but an instrument of torture, a device of pure, bureaucratic sadism. When she forced Harry Potter to write lines with it during his detentions, the quill magically carved the words, "I must not tell lies," into the back of his hand, using his own blood as ink. This act is a perfect metaphor for Umbridge's methodology. It was a form of violence that was both deeply personal and coldly impersonal. It left a physical scar, a permanent record of his punishment, yet it was administered with the detached air of official procedure. There was no flash of green light, no screamed incantation, just the quiet scratching sound of a nib on parchment. It was cruelty laundered through the mechanisms of discipline, evil hiding behind stationery and official seals. Umbridge's prejudice was directed not just at those who defied her authority, but at anyone she considered half-breed or inferior. Her hatred for creatures like werewolves, centaurs, and merpeople was well known. During her time at Hogwarts, she led the charge to sack Sybil Trelawney and nearly drove the centaurs to violent retribution through her bigotry and disrespect. Her worldview was one of rigid purity and order, a desire to control and suppress anything that did not fit into her narrow definition of acceptability. This prejudice found its ultimate expression after Voldemort's takeover of the Ministry, Umbridge, finding a regime whose ideology perfectly matched her own, thrived. As the head of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, She oversaw the persecution of Muggleborns, putting them on trial for stealing magic and sentencing them to Azkaban. She did this not as a Death Eater, but as a loyal ministry official, her actions sanctioned by the full weight of a corrupted government. Perhaps her most heinous act was her misuse of the Dementors. As senior undersecretary, she was the one who ordered 2 Dementors to attack Harry Potter in Little Whinging, a blatant attempt to silence or discredit him. This was a perversion of justice, using the wizarding world's most foul creatures not to guard a prison, but as personal assassins in a political vendetta. It demonstrated her willingness to use any tool at her disposal, no matter how dark, to achieve her aims. She saw the Dementors not as a terrifying force of nature to be contained, but as a policy instrument, a resource to be deployed in the service of her ambition. Dolores Umbridge is a critical figure in the examination of Slytherin-like power, because she proves that the darkest acts do not always require the dark arts. She was a tyrant who operated within the system, using laws, regulations, and bureaucracy as her weapons. Her story is a chilling reminder that evil is often mundane, that it can thrive in the brightly lit corridors of power, disguised in pink cardigans and a fondness for decorative kittens. She represents the insidious nature of institutional corruption, where the mechanisms of order are turned into instruments of oppression. Her ambition was for control, her cunning was for manipulation, and her legacy is one of pain inflicted not by a curse, but by a decree. The various paths to power, trod by figures like Voldemort, Snape, Slughorn, and Umbridge, all highlight a central theme: the acquisition and use of influence. Beyond individual stories, there exists a broader set of mechanics for how those with a Slytherin mindset gather and wield leverage in the magical world. Chapter 14. Mechanics of Influence. The story of Slytherin is, at its core, a study in the mechanics of influence. While raw magical power and a mastery of the dark arts are the most dramatic expressions of this influence, they are far from the only ones. For centuries, those who embodied the Slytherin mindset have cultivated a sophisticated and multifaceted approach to gathering leverage, one that often operates far from the dueling grounds, in the quiet, influential spaces where decisions are made and society is shaped. This is the power of patronage, the currency of secrets, and the art of reputation, engineering a toolset for acquiring control that is as potent as any spell. One of the most enduring methods of Slytherin influence is the creation of patronage webs, as exemplified by figures like Horace Slughorn and, in a more political context, Lucius Malfoy. The strategic cultivation of relationships is paramount. This process begins at Hogwarts, where promising students are identified and brought into the fold. A successful Slytherin graduate never truly leaves their network. They become a node in a system of favors and obligations. A high-ranking ministry official might secure a job for the child of an old school friend. In return, they can count on that family's support, be it a political donation, a favorable vote on a piece of legislation, or simply a useful piece of information down the line. This system creates a self-perpetuating cycle of influence, a shadow economy where loyalty and access are the primary currencies. It ensures that power remains concentrated within a select group, making it difficult for outsiders to break into the established order. Secrets are another vital currency in the Slytherin arsenal. A well-kept secret about a political rival's indiscretion, a business competitor's weakness, or a family's hidden shame is a powerful lever. This is where a skill like legilimency becomes a formidable political tool, allowing a practitioner to subtly probe for vulnerabilities without the subject even being aware. However, influence can be gained through more mundane means as well: gossip, blackmail, and the careful collection of compromising information. This is the power of plausible deniability. An influential figure like Lucius Malfoy would rarely be caught making a direct threat. Instead, a veiled hint, a casual mention of a delicate subject, would be enough to ensure compliance. This method allows the user to exert control without ever being seen to break the law, maintaining a veneer of respectability while manipulating events from behind the scenes. The institutions of the wizarding world, the Ministry, the Wizengamot, and even Hogwarts itself, are the primary battlegrounds where this influence is wielded. Control over these gatekeeping bodies is the ultimate prize. Securing a seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, as Lucius Malfoy did, allows one to shape educational policy, hire and fire headmasters, and instill the next generation with a particular worldview. Influence within the Ministry of Magic is even more critical. Slytherin-aligned individuals have historically sought positions in key departments like magical law enforcement or international magical cooperation, places where they can shape policy, control information, and protect their own interests. Prizes and awards, like the Order of Merlin, are also targets for manipulation, as they serve to legitimize individuals and their ideologies in the public eye. By controlling the institutions that define success and mete out justice, one can effectively control the narrative of the entire society. This leads to the art of reputation engineering. For many influential Slytherins, public perception is a crucial asset to be managed. Families like the Malfoys have for generations projected an image of ancient, respectable aristocracy, making generous public donations to hospitals and charities while privately pursuing a dark agenda. This carefully crafted public face provides a shield against scrutiny and allows them to operate with a degree of impunity. They understand that society is often more willing to forgive the sins of the powerful and well-regarded. This is the soft power of the wizarding world, a stark contrast to the raw magical force wielded by a figure like Voldemort. While Voldemort sought to rule through fear, others sought to rule through influence, which can often be more stable and enduring. These mechanics of influence are not exclusive to Slytherins, of course. Witches and wizards from all houses seek to build careers and make their mark on the world. But the Slytherin approach is often characterized by a more deliberate, strategic, and self-serving methodology. The ambition is not just to succeed, but to dominate a chosen field. The cunning is applied to navigating and manipulating systems of power. The resourcefulness is used to turn every connection and piece of information into a potential advantage. The goal is the acquisition of leverage, the ability to make things happen, whether through overt command or subtle persuasion. This intricate dance of power, favors, and secrets highlights the complex social and political landscape of the wizarding world. It is a world where a well-placed word can be more devastating than a curse, and where the most important battles are fought not with wands, but with whispers. The success of this system often depends on another core tenet of the Slytherin ideology, the importance of bloodlines and the artifacts that signify their power. Chapter 15. Artifacts, Bloodlines, and Allegiance. At the very core of the Slytherin ideology lies a deep and abiding obsession with blood. The concept of blood purity is more than just a social prejudice. It is a magical philosophy, a belief that ancestry is the ultimate determinant of a witch or wizard's worth and power. This belief is anchored and perpetuated through two key elements: family heirlooms, which serve as physical manifestations of a family's legacy, and the intricate, often troubled, history of the bloodlines themselves. The tragic history of the Gaunt family, the last direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin, serves as the ultimate case study in the power and the peril of this worldview. For ancient pureblood families, artifacts and heirlooms are not mere possessions. They are identity anchors. An object like Salazar Slytherin's locket, or the Peveril ring, passed down through the Gaunt line, is a tangible link to a glorious past. It is proof of a distinguished lineage, a constant reminder of the magical greatness flowing through one's veins. These artifacts mediate memory, power, and myth. They are imbued with the stories of the ancestors who owned them, and often with powerful magic of their own. For a family in decline, like the Gaunts, These objects were all they had left. Their wealth was gone, their influence had vanished, and their minds were addled by generations of inbreeding. But the locket and the ring were undeniable proof that they were still royalty in the wizarding world, the direct heirs of Slytherin and Cadmus Peverell. This is why Marvolo Gaunt clung to them with such ferocious, delusional pride. The artifacts were his identity. Lord Voldemort, as the last of the Gaunts, inherited this reverence for symbolic objects, which directly influenced his choice of Horcruxes. He didn't just want to anchor his soul. He wanted to anchor it in objects of power and historical significance, items that would elevate his own legacy by associating it with the great figures of the past. By turning Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's cup into Horcruxes, he was, in his mind, claiming his place among them, asserting his own historical importance. The artifact, in this context, becomes a vessel not just for a soul fragment, but for an entire narrative of power and entitlement. The concept of blood purity itself is built on a foundation of magical and social fallacies. From a practical standpoint, the insistence on marrying only within a small pool of pure-blood families, as practiced by families like the Blacks and the Gaunts, often led to genetic degradation, not strength. The Gaunts' instability and penchant for violence were direct consequences of this practice. The very idea that magical ability is diluted by Muggle blood is demonstrably false. The wizarding world is filled with immensely powerful witches and wizards of mixed or Muggle parentage, from Severus Snape, the half-blood prince, to Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age. So, what does blood purity actually accomplish? Its primary function is not magical, but social and political. It is a tool for exclusion, a way to create an in-group and an out-group, thereby consolidating power and privilege. By defining themselves as pure, the magical aristocracy could justify their elevated status and deny opportunities to those they deemed inferior. It created a rigid class system, where ancestry was more important than talent or character. This ideology, preached for centuries in the common rooms of Slytherin House, provided a ready-made justification for the prejudice and discrimination that Voldemort would later exploit to build his army. He did not invent pure blood supremacy. He simply took a long-simmering societal prejudice and fanned it into the flames of open war. Allegiance in this world is often tied to these concepts of blood and heritage. The Death Eaters were predominantly purebloods, who felt their rightful place in the world was being threatened by the rise of Muggleborns and the progressive policies of figures like Albus Dumbledore. Their allegiance to Voldemort was, for many, an allegiance to a restoration of what they saw as the natural order. Voldemort, as the heir of Slytherin, was the symbolic champion of their cause. He gave voice to their deepest prejudices and promised them a return to glory. However, the story of the wizarding world is also a story of these allegiances being broken and redefined. Sirius Black rejected his family's blood purity obsession and chose allegiance based on friendship and principle. Regulus Black's allegiance shifted from his family and his master to his own conscience. Severus Snape's ultimate allegiance was to the memory of a Muggle-born witch he had loved. These figures demonstrate that while blood and heritage are powerful forces, they are not deterministic. Allegiance is ultimately a choice, a decision to stand for a set of values, regardless of one's ancestry. The Gaunt family stands as a grim warning of where the obsession with bloodlines and artifacts leads to isolation, madness, and ruin. They were so consumed by the myth of their own past that they were unable to function in the present. They were prisoners of their own heritage, their power a hollow echo of what it once was. Their story is a microcosm of the entire pure-blood ideology, a grand, proud facade hiding a core of decay. This ideology, nurtured for centuries within the walls of Slytherin House, would ultimately turn the school itself into the final battleground for the future of the magical world. Chapter 16. Hogwarts as Battleground. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was conceived as a sanctuary, a safe haven where young witches and wizards could learn to control their powers, shielded from a fearful Muggle world. Yet, from its very foundation, the castle was also a battleground of ideas. The conflicting philosophies of its four founders were built into its very architecture, both literally and figuratively. Over 1,000 years, this ideological conflict would continue to simmer, erupting periodically into open hostility until the school itself became the stage for the final, decisive confrontation of the Second Wizarding War. The battle for Hogwarts was more than a military engagement. It was a battle for the soul of the institution, and by extension, the future of the wizarding world. The transformation of Hogwarts from a place of learning into a strategic military asset began subtly. Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets was the first move in this long war, turning the school's plumbing into a hidden weapon delivery system. For centuries, the conflict was largely ideological, waged in the rivalries between houses, the debates over curriculum, and the political maneuvering of the Board of Governors. Slytherin House, with its emphasis on pure blood tradition, often stood in opposition to the more inclusive values of the other three houses, particularly Gryffindor. This rivalry, while often manifesting as simple schoolboy competition on the Quidditch pitch, reflected the deep societal divisions outside the castle walls. During the Second Wizarding War, this ideological conflict escalated into a physical one. Hogwarts, under the leadership of Albus Dumbledore, became the heart of the resistance against Lord Voldemort. It was a symbol of tolerance, inclusivity, and the fight for a just magical society. For Voldemort, conquering Hogwarts was therefore a crucial objective, both strategically and symbolically. Control of the school meant control over the education of the next generation of witches and wizards. It was a powerful tool for indoctrination, a place where he could stamp out dissent and mold young minds to his own dark ideology. The recruitment of students into his cause was a key part of his strategy. He preyed on the fears and prejudices of students from pure-blood families, turning them into informants, and eventually into junior Death Eaters like Draco Malfoy. The school itself became a fortress. Dumbledore and the faculty implemented a host of powerful defensive enchantments to protect the students. These magical fortifications, which included spells to repel intruders and detect dark magic, turned the castle into one of the most secure locations in the wizarding world. The staff itself was composed of factions. On one side were the members of the Order of the Phoenix, like Minerva McGonagall and Phileas Flitwick, who were committed to fighting Voldemort. On the other were those who were either sympathetic to his cause or too intimidated to oppose him. And in the middle was Severus Snape, playing his dangerous double game, ostensibly serving Voldemort as headmaster, while secretly working to protect the students and aid the resistance. The final Battle of Hogwarts was the culmination of this 1,000-year conflict. Voldemort's army, a horde of Death Eaters, giants, and other dark creatures, laid siege to the castle. The defenders were a coalition of students, teachers, members of the Order of the Phoenix, and magical creatures loyal to Dumbledore's cause. The battle raged through the corridors, classrooms, and grounds, turning familiar school locations into scenes of carnage. This was Salazar Slytherin's vision of purging the school brought to its violent, terrifying conclusion. But it was met with the fierce, united resistance of Godric Gryffindor's heirs and all who believed in a different, better vision for the wizarding world. The geography of the battle was deeply symbolic. The fighting moved from the open grounds to the very heart of the castle, the Great Hall. The final duel between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort took place where generations of students had been sorted, had eaten their meals, and had celebrated their triumphs. It was a confrontation between two different kinds of power, fought in the room that represented the school's communal life. Voldemort, the lone tyrant who believed in his own singular supremacy, faced Harry, who was protected by the love and sacrifice of his friends and family. The battle for Hogwarts was a stark demonstration of why contested institutions matter more than simple battlefields. An institution like Hogwarts is where values are forged, where allegiances are tested, and where the future is written. To lose the school would have been to lose the war on a fundamental, ideological level. The defense of the castle was a testament to the power of unity over division. Students from Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw fought side by side. Even some Slytherin students, led by the returning Horace Slughorn, chose to join the fight against Voldemort, a crucial sign that the house was not a monolith of dark magic. In the end, Voldemort's quest for personal immortality, the ultimate selfish act, was defeated by acts of collective sacrifice and love. Harry's willingness to walk to his death to save others, Narcissa Malfoy's lie to the Dark Lord to save her son, and Neville Longbottom's defiance in the face of certain death were the moments that turned the tide. The castle was left scarred and broken, many of its defenders lost, but it had held. The battle was won not just by superior magic, but by superior ideals. The inclusive, tolerant vision of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff had triumphed over the exclusionary, hateful ideology of Salazar Slytherin. The school had been tested in the most extreme way imaginable and had emerged, wounded but victorious, as a symbol of hope and resilience. The end of the battle, however, was not the end of the story. The wizarding world was left to pick up the pieces, to count its dead, and to face the difficult process of rebuilding not just a castle, but a society. This would require a period of profound reckoning, especially for the house that had, for so long, been associated with the darkness that had almost consumed them all. Chapter 17. Aftermath and Reckoning. In the pale dawn that broke over the ruins of Hogwarts, the silence was as profound as the violence that had preceded it. Lord Voldemort was dead, his body a simple, mortal thing, stripped of the dark magic that had sustained it. The Second Wizarding War was over. But victory was not a clean, simple moment of triumph. It was a complex and painful beginning. The wizarding world now faced the monumental task of reckoning with the past and rebuilding a future from the rubble. For Slytherin House, the House of the Vanquished, this was a moment of profound crisis and existential uncertainty. Its reputation was in tatters, its name synonymous with the darkest chapter in magical history. The aftermath of the war would force the house and the wizarding community as a whole to confront difficult questions about justice, memory, and the very nature of ambition. The immediate post-war period was one of trials and accountability. The Ministry of Magic, liberated from Voldemort's control, began the process of rounding up the surviving Death Eaters and their collaborators. The trials that followed were a necessary, if fraught, exercise in justice. Some, like the Malfoy family, were able to avoid Azkaban by providing evidence against other Death Eaters or by virtue of Narcissa Malfoy's pivotal lie that had saved Harry Potter. Their cases highlighted the complex, messy nature of justice in the wake of a civil war, where allegiances were not always clear-cut and motivations were often mixed. Others, the unrepentant fanatics, were sentenced to life in prison. This process was a necessary lancing of a societal wound, an attempt to impose order and hold accountable those who had committed atrocities. For Slytherin House, the reckoning was more personal and cultural. In the immediate aftermath, to be a Slytherin was to carry a burden of shame and suspicion. The green and silver banners were, for many, a symbol of collaboration and bigotry. The house had to begin the slow, painful process of rethinking itself, of separating its core values from the dark ideology that had co-opted them for so long. This was a challenge that would fall to a new generation of students, children who had grown up with the stories of the war but had not been direct participants. They were faced with the task of redefining what it meant to be a Slytherin in a post-Voldemort world. This new generation included students who did not fit the old cliché. Albus Potter, the son of Harry Potter, was sorted into Slytherin, a moment that symbolized a potential new beginning for the house. His presence in the dungeons, alongside Scorpius Malfoy, the son of his father's old rival, represented a bridge between two formerly warring worlds. Their friendship suggested a future where the old animosities could be overcome, where a student's character, not their house or their family name, would be the true measure of their worth. These students were forced to grapple with the legacy of their house, to acknowledge the darkness in its past, while striving to create a different future. They had to learn to embrace the positive aspects of their Slytherin identity, ambition, resourcefulness, leadership, while firmly rejecting the prejudice and supremacy that had for so long defined it. The broader wizarding society had to choose between restorative and retributive impulses. A purely retributive approach, one that sought only to punish and exclude all who had been associated with the old regime, would have only perpetuated the cycle of division and resentment. A restorative approach, however, sought to heal and reintegrate. It involved acknowledging the harm done, but also creating a path for redemption for those who were willing to change. This was the spirit in which Harry Potter spoke at the trials of the Malfoys, and it was the spirit that would be necessary to truly heal the rifts in their society. The ethics of ambition became a central question. Was it possible to be ambitious without being ruthless? Could one be cunning in the service of a good cause? The post-war era was a time for re-evaluating these fundamental questions. The process of memory was also crucial. The war could not be forgotten. The stories of those who had fought and died, the sacrifices that had been made, needed to be told and retold. The memory of the war served as a permanent cautionary tale, a reminder of where the ideology of blood purity and the lust for absolute power could lead. For Slytherins, this meant confronting the uncomfortable truths about their founder, their most infamous alumnus, and the role their house had played in the rise of darkness. It meant accepting that their legacy was a dual one, containing both the celebrated Merlin and the reviled Voldemort. The rebuilding of Hogwarts was a physical manifestation of this societal healing. The castle was restored, its broken walls mended. But the changes were not just architectural. The atmosphere within the school began to change. The inter-house rivalries, while still present, lost much of their toxic edge. The war had forged new bonds of respect and understanding between students of different houses who had fought side by side. The experience of shared trauma and collective victory had, for many, erased the old lines of division. Slytherin House could no longer be easily dismissed as the evil house. Its members had a chance to prove, through their actions, that they were more than the sum of their stereotypes. The aftermath of the war was not an end, but a transition. It was a messy, complicated, and ongoing process of healing and redefinition. The wizarding world had looked into the abyss and, at great cost, had pulled itself back. The future of Slytherin House, and the society it was a part of, now depended on its ability to learn from the past, to embrace a more inclusive and tolerant vision, and to remember that the choices of individuals, not the banners under which they sit, are what truly define them. This long, painful history, from Salazar to Voldemort and beyond, forces us to synthesize the many complex and often contradictory faces of what it means to be a Slytherin, and to understand ambition not as a destination, but as a starting point. Chapter 18. The Many Faces of Slytherin. The long and turbulent history of Slytherin House is a chronicle of power in all its forms, the power to build and the power to destroy, the power of open conquest and the power of silent resistance. To look at this legacy and see only darkness is to miss the fundamental lesson that lies at its core. The traits that define the House of the Serpent are not a prescription for a moral path, but a set of formidable tools. Ambition, cunning, resourcefulness, and self-preservation are the raw materials of influence. The final shape they take depends entirely on the hands that wield them. The story of Slytherin is a powerful argument for evaluating individuals over the banners they carry, for understanding that the same qualities, can lead to vastly different ends. Ambition is the engine. For Tom Riddle, it was a boundless, nihilistic hunger for immortality, a desire to elevate himself above all others by conquering the fundamental laws of nature. It was an ambition that hollowed him out, that drove him to mutilate his own soul in the pursuit of a goal that ultimately destroyed him. But for Merlin, ambition was the drive to create a more just and ordered world. It was the desire to build institutions, to codify ethics, and to foster peace between warring communities. For Horace Slughorn, ambition was more modest. The desire for comfort, influence, and the pleasure of being connected to greatness. And for Severus Snape, ambition was transformed into a singular, obsessive purpose: to protect the son of the woman he had loved, an ambition that required him to sacrifice his reputation, his safety, and ultimately, his life. The tool is the same. The application is everything. Cunning, too, is a double-edged sword. In the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange, it was a weapon of psychological warfare, a cruel delight in taunting and terrorizing her victims. For Dolores Umbridge, it was the skill of bureaucratic manipulation, the ability to twist rules and procedures into instruments of pain and control. But cunning can also be a shield for the vulnerable. It was the quiet, meticulous planning of Regulus Black, who used the Dark Lord's own methods of secrecy to orchestrate an act of brilliant sabotage. It was the complex, layered deception of Severus Snape, who used his cunning to fool the greatest legilimens of all time, maintaining a delicate balance of trust and suspicion that was critical to the war effort. Cunning is the art of seeing the hidden path, and that path can lead toward destruction or toward salvation. Perhaps the most misunderstood Slytherin trait is that of self-preservation. In its darkest form, it becomes the selfish, paranoid creed of Lord Voldemort, who valued his own existence above all else and was willing to sacrifice the entire world to secure it. But self-preservation can also be the instinct that allows a person to survive long enough to make a difference. It is the tactical retreat, the decision to live to fight another day. For a double agent like Snape, every moment was an act of self-preservation, a necessary condition for him to continue his vital work. In this context, restraint, the decision not to act, not to reveal one's full power, not to rise to a challenge, can be the greatest force multiplier. The power to hold back, to wait for the opportune moment, is a form of discipline that the impulsive and the arrogant often lack. Snape's entire life was a testament to the power of restraint. The history of Slytherin forces us to move beyond simple labels. The House of the Serpent is not inherently evil, any more than the House of the Lion is inherently good. They are simply different approaches to the world, different sets of tools for navigating its challenges. The sorting is not a final judgment. It is a recognition of potential. What a student does with that potential is a matter of choice, a series of decisions made every day in the classrooms, the corridors, and the world beyond the castle walls. The greatest heroes and the most terrifying villains can emerge from the same common room, shaped by the same values, but ultimately defined by their own individual character. The legacy of Slytherin is a living argument, not a final verdict. It is a complex, often uncomfortable, and deeply human story about the nature of power and the choices we make when we acquire it. It reminds us that the serpent is a symbol not just of temptation and danger, but of wisdom, transformation, and the potential for rebirth. The house that Salazar Slytherin built as a monument to his own prejudice became, over 1,000 years, something far more complicated and far more interesting, a crucible that tested the very limits of magic and morality, and produced a legacy as varied, as brilliant, and as terrifying as the wizarding world itself. Epilogue. The Sorting Hat today. In the Great Hall of a rebuilt Hogwarts, a new generation of first-year students stands, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. On a stool before them sits a frayed and ancient wizard's hat. For a moment, there is silence. Then, a rip near the brim opens wide like a mouth, and the Sorting Hat begins to sing. Its song is different now, tempered by the memory of war and the lessons learned at such a great cost. It still sings of the bravery of Gryffindor, the wit of Ravenclaw, and the loyalty of Hufflepuff. But when it speaks of Slytherin, its voice is perhaps more thoughtful, more nuanced than it was in years past. It might sing not just of ambition, but of the vision required to build a better world. It might speak of cunning not as a tool for deception, but as the wisdom to find a peaceful path through a thorny problem. It might honor the legacy of those Slytherins who, in the end, chose loyalty to their friends and their conscience over the dogma of blood purity. It might remind the students that a house is a family, a place of belonging, but that true greatness lies in the courage to stand alone for what is right, regardless of the banner under which one was sorted. The Sorting Hat, which contains the consciousness of the four founders, has witnessed a millennium of history. It has seen the House of Slytherin produce both darkness and light. It has placed students in its ranks who would go on to terrorize the world, and those who would secretly work to save it. Its song today would be a reflection of that complex truth. It would be a song of caution, but also one of hope, a hope that the students before it will learn from the mistakes of the past, that they will understand that the qualities they possess are a starting point, not a destiny. The legacy of Slytherin, like the legacies of all the houses, is not a verdict carved in stone. It is a living argument, a conversation between the past and the future, continued by every new student who sits upon that stool and chooses what kind of witch or wizard they will